Good morning, everyone. In this Parshabat, Shalach Lecha, we discover the whole story of the Meraglim, the spies that went into Jericho. And in the words of my friend Alex Sokolov, he made a synopsis, basically, of what the Torah teaches us. This episode in our history tells us that we should never be too afraid to do something if we know that it is possible and that it is worth it. If the spies who were struck dead were lying to keep their own importance, it tells us that an important position is meaningless if one doesn't live up to one's responsibility not to ruin things for others. Well, all you have to do is look around us. In general, you see a lot of people doing things that are ruining things for others. Listen to this headline that appeared this past week from Maya Belding-Ziden. She's a writer and pluralist Jewish educator, and she lives in Israel with her 3 cats in Rishon LeZion. Stop using Israel as an excuse for not supporting Black Lives Matter. That's the headline in the Arizona Jewish Post. And here's what she says, quote, "I am an Israeli citizen and a proud Zionist. I oppose BDS because I believe full civil rights and security for Palestinians will only be achieved through Israeli-Palestinian dialogue and trust building. By the same token, I cannot refuse to engage with Black Lives Matter. The history of racism and white supremacy in the United States is violent and painful, like that of Israel and Palestine. No American of good conscience can simply opt out of racism in America, no more than Israelis can simply ignore the existence of Palestinians or vice versa." Yes, you're right about that, Mayan. It says, as you say, white supremacy is a much bigger threat to American Jews than BDS is to the state of Israel, but even if it weren't, even it were not in our self-interest as Jews to stand in solidarity with Black America against hate and bigotry, I would join the protests anyway because as an observant Jew, I'm obligated to do so by the Torah. Yes, you're right about that, Mayan. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice you shall pursue. Parshat Shoftim, Deuteronomy. We'll talk about that later, Mayan. But making a moral equivalency between what has happened in this country for the past 300 years, let's say, cannot be painted against the tapestry of Israel's battle with anti-Jewish racism, which is measured in the thousands of years. You go on to say, because Black people were made in the image of God, of course, because my Black brother's blood is calling out from the ground, because I cannot stand idly by while my Black neighbor's life is threatened because it matters. Of course it matters, Mayan. When you address the Jewish community in general, you are preaching to the choir. Arizona Jewish Post disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed in this article are those of the author and do not necessarily reflect the views of JTA or its parent company. Now, in all fairness, let's listen to Alan Dershowitz, Harvard professor at law. He says, quote, in his latest article, Black Lives Matter must rescind its anti-Israel declaration. Quote, he says, it is a real tragedy that Black Lives Matter, which has done so much good in raising awareness of police abuses, has now moved away from its central mission and has declared war against the nation state of the Jewish people. In a recently issued platform, more than 60 groups that form the core of Black Lives Matter went out of their way to single out one of foreign nation, to accuse that nation of genocide and apartheid. Quote, Black Lives Matter should rescind the portions of the platform that falsely accuse Israel of genocide and apartheid. If it does not, it risks ending up in the dustbin of history along with other discredited, bigoted groups. End of quote. So Mayan, you're going to take me back to what I spoke about 2 weeks ago, because what I said would probably not make it into the Arizona Jewish Post. You will not hear a conservative voice, as you put it. No, you will not hear from someone who's been there and done that over and over again. So here it is. With my friend Marty Faison, who was a Black American back in the 60s. With Marty, it wasn't easy to argue over a cup of coffee at Chock full of nuts on Madison Avenue. Quote, who had it easier, the token Jew at Dancer Fitzgerald's sample or the Black from Harlem, unquote. When I got out of the Air Force, I hitchhiked to Mexico City, and on the way back, I made a mistake of knocking on the door of a Black motel only. I was arrested by some Georgia cracker cops, having to prove that I really was a Jew and was really in the United States Air Force. And I was not a rabble-rouser for the civil rights movement. My first secretary that worked for me was Black, and she was beautiful, very beautiful. And I was one of the creative guys. In fact, I was the executive director of Black is Beautiful. I helped to found it. I went into Spanish Harlem to get one of the young lords out of jail. I marched with the civil rights movement against Judge Julius Hoffman and the Chicago 7. I wrote letters to the anti-Semitic New York Times advocating for justice for Blacks and Puerto Ricans. I slept with my Black airmen in the same barracks. I could sweat Jewish and they could sweat Black. We flew together. We ate together. We drank together. We caroused together and slept together. I rode with the Blacks in Black neighborhoods by subway, by bus, and by New York yellow cab. So I'm about to say, I have no sense of privilege because I'm a child of the Holocaust and of the 60s, and I'm proud of it. Then we have Chevy Summit. Also in the Arizona Jewish Post, it says, people will say, oh, I didn't know you were so liberal, Summit said. Still, Summit believes that Orthodox women may be more open to changing their perspective because they tend to have more positive interactions with other women of color than Orthodox men. She pointed to her own experiences having long personal conversations with nurses at the hospital where she gave birth to her children. I don't know that my husband's ever had that opportunity just because his circles just run differently, she said. Samet and Greenwald from the Holocaust Museum downtown said sensitivity around anti-Semitism can sometimes make it harder for Jews to confront their own racism. No, Greenwald, no, anti-Semitism can make you remember anti-Semitism, is what he said. I had also thought that as a Jewish person, every generation going back has been persecuted and my ancestors hadn't enslaved anyone. So I was exempt, said Greenberg, who works at the Holocaust Museum. Whether I like it or not, I benefit from white privilege. No, you don't, Greenberg, nor will you ever. Which brings to mind my little bar mitzvah devar, which lasted a couple of minutes, by Cyrus Adler, who helped form the Jewish Theological Seminary in America in the late 19th century. He said, I am a Hebrew. I will continue to hold my banner aloft. I find myself born into a people and a religion. The preservation of my people must be for a purpose, for God does nothing without a purpose. The simple, the ultimate in every direction is sealed to me. The growth of a blade of grass is no harder to explain than the course of the planets. What has been now, preserved now for 4,000 years was not saved that I should overthrow it. Therefore, I'm willing to remain a link in the great chain. My people have survived the prehistoric paganism, the Babylonian polytheism, the aesthetic Hellenism, the sagacious Romanism, and at one time, the blandishments and persecutions of the church, and it will survive. The modern dilettantism and the current materialism, holding aloft the traditional Jewish ideals inflexibly until the world shall become capable of recognizing their worth. Bezrat Hashem. Which brings me to some of the goings on in these movements. Former Minister of the Knesset, Dr. Einat Wilf, warned against defacing and removing monuments and statues of historical figures due to associations with oppression or racism following the vandalism of statues of Abraham Lincoln and Winston Churchill in England. These are, of course, violations of the First Amendment, freedom of speech and expression. Quote, if Jews took down symbols of their discrimination, oppression, persecution, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, not a stone or a flag would remain across the Western and Islamic world. Human history is mostly one of brutality and exploitation. To move forward, we remember, not erase, Dr. Wilf wrote on Twitter, i.e., there would be no Yad Vashem. There would be no National Holocaust Memorial in Washington. And there would not be a Simon Wiesenthal Center in LA. Swastikas are too easy, but the systemic oppression and persecution of Jews was made in the name of crosses and crescents and empires. Leaders across the Western, Slavic, and Islamic worlds expelled Jews and closed their doors to us. The symbols are woven into those civilizations, Dr. Wilf concluded. I responded to former member of the Knesset, Dr. Wolf, saying, quote, "Your observation, unfortunately, is spot on. I'm a survivor of the Holocaust and the Battle of Britain. My father was first Cantor of the United Kingdom. He lost his entire family on the continent. First, they ran from Sanok in Galicia, a stone's throw from Auschwitz, about 140 some odd miles away. And then they had their backs to the English Channel in Antwerp. My father survived because he came to England to marry my mother, Rachel, a shidduch, a match made in heaven. I feel like we are spinning in the wind during this time of hysteria and pandemic. Even our own Jews, especially our Jews, have gone mad with genuflection before the altar of Baal." Mayan. And in case you didn't hear the mainstream voice of our fellow Jews, here it is. Let us hold the policeman who killed George Floyd accountable to the fullest extent of the law. And let us prosecute the vandals who think it is okay to burn down someone's lifelong livelihood and business in a moment of hysteria and lawlessness to the fullest extent of the law. Do you understand that, Mayan? Order, seder, seder, order. Mayan, you speak as if Jews have not been at the barricades. Do you know of our fight for Black Lives Matter in the 60s? 60 years ago. And this is where I have to reiterate the words of Rabbi Hanina in the Talmud, in Avot. Dina de Malchuta Dina, the law of the land is the law. And especially it is incumbent upon Jews to obey that law. Go back with me, Mayan, to Yosef Vladimirovich Trumpeldor, who was an early Zionist who died defending the settlement of Tel Chai, early Israel, in 1920. Mayan, let's go back to April 19th, 1943, on the eve of Pesach. In a desperate attempt to prevent the Nazis from making further deportations of Jews to the death camps, young Jewish resistance fighters in the Warsaw Ghetto fought against overwhelming odds to their death. With few weapons, the Jewish fighters were able to resist for 11 days until German reinforcements were called in an effort to put an end to the uprising. Over 2,000 SS and German troops, backed by panzer divisions and police units, converged on the Warsaw Ghetto. They found there were only 500 Jewish fighters from Zob and approximately 250 other Jewish fighting groups. The Jews were found to have had only 7 Polish rifles, 1 Russian rifle, 1 German rifle, 59 pistols, several hundred homemade grenades, incendiary explosives and ammunition. Despite the formidable power of the Nazi arsenal, German troops could not quash the Jewish uprising, and after 2 days of vicious fighting, Stroop, the Nazi commander, ordered that the ghetto be burned to the ground. Mordechai Anilevich, a young person like you, born 1919 in Poland and died May 8th, 1943 in Warsaw, the leader of the Jewish fighting organization Zydowska Organizacja Bojowa, ZOB. He was only 24 years old. One does not have to wear his or her heart on his or her sleeve to prove to the world that he or she has a moral compass or a conscience or courage. Most observant, God-fearing Jews are wrapped up in tikkun olam, the repair of the world. Black lives do matter. Go to the hospitals. Tap the doctors and nurses on the shoulder in the ER and operating rooms around this country, and you will see how many Jews are saving Black lives that matter. Mayan, before you display your moral outrage, come with me to the streets of LA and watch my friend Alex Sokolov, an out-of-work writer, deliver food packages to the needy on the streets of LA. In order to fulfill the mitzvah of Gemilut Chasadim, performing acts of charity and loving kindness. No, God-fearing Jews, Mayan, are out there. Chevy and Greenberg, they're rooting from the bleachers for what is right. Go out and meet them. They are not the ones waiting to make a photo op for this or that. They are the humans, black, white, every color and creed of the rainbow. They are our heroes, praying for us, women making cholent for Shabbos and caring for the kids, men putting on tefillin hoping his business doesn't go under during the pandemic so he can feed his wife and kids, and waiting to get together with his Mayan on Shabbos for a little peace and quiet. Mayan, if you stop just for a moment, and if the din from the demonstrations would die down just for a moment, you would hear the murmurings of Jews all over the world praying for justice and peace. Justice and peace for you, Mayan, and our Black brothers and sisters. Mayan, you are right in this respect. It is a mandate in the Torah. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdov. Justice, justice you shall pursue. Parshat Shoftim, Deuteronomy. Shabbat Shalom, Mayan.